or so for people to come over.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm hoping that you've joined us from your respective workshops. I know we're running a bit over time. We'll see how we get on in this session. My name is Radojka Miljevic. I'm from Campbell Tickell, one of the sponsors for this day. And I'm really delighted to introduce two authors of a report on the commercial case for gender equality in football. And one of those is Christina Philippou, and the other is Beth Clarkson. Let me tell you a little bit about them. I can see we've just seen someone's eyebrows. Thank you, Niall. So Christina is a principal lecturer in the Faculty of Business and Law at the University of Portsmouth. She joined there in 2015. Her research and teaching focuses on financial and forensic accounting, economic crime and sports finance. She's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. She's a certified fraud examiner. And she has a background as a forensic accountant for one of the big four. And before that, she worked in audit. She's written and co-delivered football finance course for the Premier League's EAM programme. And she's given public seminars on sports governance and corruption. Must be a rich topic. And Beth Clarkson is here also from the University of Portsmouth. She's a senior lecturer in sports management. She is an equality, diversity and inclusion lead and researcher and policy advisor. She's got over 15 years experience of working in academy football across the UK, Europe and America, and holds a UEFA B coaching licence. Her research on gender in football has won awards for excellence in scholarship on women in sport, and she's a regular media contributor about the governance of women's football. So we're in the hands of two very well qualified people to talk to us about the commercial case for gender equality in football. So I wanted to turn to you both first of all and just give us a few headlines from the report. Tell us about, what have you found from your research?
Thanks, Radojka. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. For me, I have to say the section on boards was quite eye-opening. We looked at the percentage of women on boards, not great percentages, but even more scary was that 2/3 of clubs in the top 4 leagues in England and Wales have all male boards. Which in 2022 seems a little bit out of character with the rest of industry. Sorry, Beth?
No, I was just going to say that we took quite a broad overview here when we thought about gender diversity in football. So boards was a key aspect, a very prominent aspect within the report. But we also looked at broadcasting and visibility, at fans, communication, women's football. We looked at participation, talent development, marketing and sponsorship, and community and merchandise. So there was a whole range of different findings, which I'm sure the report, for those that are interested, can delve into further. So I'd also agree with Christina that there's quite significant statistics that are perhaps surprising to some and maybe not so to others, but the point of the report is to make a commercial case for gender diversity in football, and some of the findings from that really highlight reasons, aside from moral reasons, as to why gender diversity can help football clubs and their businesses.
It's really interesting from a governance perspective. My field is governance. There's been so much research about how the diversity of boards equals good business. So as you're saying in the report, it's not just the moral and ethical case, it's that it actually leads to more effective decision making. Why is it that you think that case still seems to need to be made in the world of football when we look at the composition of boards? What is it that's holding football back from recognising where the rest of other sectors, the other parts of the corporate sector have reached?
I think it's a general cultural thing. Obviously, there are historical reasons. We all know what they are. And there is, I think, a misunderstanding as well of the importance of diversity to the financial side and the commercial side. And I think in that sense, football is playing catch up with other industries.
Okay. Beth?
Yeah, I would agree. I think culture is probably a key part there. It's something that we do. It's not something that we are, and so there's active participants within that. And for cultural reasons, the history of the game primarily has been sort of a very dominant male culture and quite closed doors in terms of those higher leadership positions in football. So that kind of closed door recruitment approach that's based on networks, perhaps over skills and qualifications, has meant that it's been difficult to enact change, or at least the progress has been quite slow if we were to consider the length of time for which women have been trying to knock down doors to get into football. So there's a whole host of different reasons there, but I would say certainly comes down to culture perhaps, and changing and evolving culture.
Do you see signs of change? Are there green shoots anywhere? Are there organisations that are showing how to do it differently in the world of football?
I think by the nature of this event, I'm going to say yes, because this event is brilliant to see, and to have so many football clubs on board with what we're trying to do, and what Fair Game are trying to do as well, and where integrity is so important and fairness. I think that's a real catalyst for change and for advocacy as well. So I think there's a lot of really good stuff happening by a lot of different individuals in football, some that perhaps people aren't necessarily aware of as much, and so there maybe is a bit of a PR exercise there around promoting all of the good stuff that is happening, but also cognizant that there's still much more work to be done.
Yeah, but it's not just within football itself. Obviously, we saw one of the sessions this morning was on women in sport media and how that's changing. That was very, very clear. We are seeing kind of more female fans involved. There is a movement. We are seeing, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still a long way to go, but we are seeing more commercial opportunities in women's football, right? Their revenues have grown, over 600%, right? Over 700%.
731 if I was going to come in there.
Just get it right. Yeah. There has been movement, right? We've seen broadcasting coming into the WSL. We are seeing a movement, both within the game, but also everybody that works with football to change. So there is some change. It's not all bad news. It's not all doom and gloom.
Good. What is it that you're hoping to achieve through the report? What is it that you want to happen with it?
Change.
Who's the audience? Who do you envisage reading it, and what kinds of conversations do you want it to provoke?
I think ultimately we all want football to be governed by fairness, and we want integrity, and that comes from actions, not just words. And I know this report is words, but we're hoping that it either lands on the desk of someone in decision making, or perhaps somebody that's interested in how they can help their football club, or how they can help advocate for change in the club that they follow or that they support. And perhaps it's helpful for them to look at gender diversity in a different way. This report is the first of its kind in football to make the commercial case for gender diversity. The moral case has been there for quite some time, but it's making that commercial case by demonstrating here's all of the evidence from all of these different areas: football, sport, business, and all of the reasons why research or industry evidence shows that this is a way to help businesses, to help football clubs long term, to be more financially sustainable, to have greater integrity, to connect with fan values, etc. So not just about the right thing to do, but that it will help business as well. So that's ultimately where I was coming from when Christina asked to put this together and do this.
I think the report's available on the Fair Game website, isn't it? I could see that a question was posted. I was very interested in something that connected with some things I've sort of listened to in other environments, really, and that's the opportunity for the women's game to be different to the men's game, to sort of learn from some of what hasn't worked for the men's game? And in your report, I think you say a couple of times, I think there are a couple of quotations about the women's game, the possibility for it to be more aligned with fan values than the men's game. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about that. What are the sorts of fan values, and how do you think the women's game can be different?
So where Beth jumps in, that's her area of expertise. So I'll pass you over to Beth first.
I was waiting for you to, I was like, shall I wait? Shall I not? This is my thing.
An assist? I think we might call that an assist in the world of football.
Yes, nice one. I just
An
got
open goal, Beth.
Yeah, I know. I better not miss. No, I think it's a real new age of women's football. We've seen broadcasting happening, greater exposure, and all these things happen upstream. And then that exposure can help to then diversify those revenue streams later down, because you have a rising fan base, because you have the ability for brands to get their faces across to a new set of potential fans. You said about inclusivity there, and the women's game being different. And I think there's an opportunity for the women's game to really forge its own path and to learn lessons maybe from the men's game, as opposed to sort of following it or trying to emulate it. And I think anyone that works in the women's game or follows the women's game doesn't believe that's what the women's game wants to do, is to be the men's game, or to work towards that. I think that's maybe a perception that comes from the outside.
Maybe the men's game doesn't want to be the men's game.
That is part of what we're seeing in terms of when we were talking about the report looks at various aspects of sponsorship, especially, and communications, and there is more appetite from the corporate world for values, and we are seeing sort of reputational damage and costs coming out of not taking that on board in terms of decision making in the men's game. And that, I think, the women's game so far has on the whole kind of shied away from that, partly because the spotlight hasn't been so big, but also because of the way it has kind of organically grown in a different way to the men's game. And Beth and I have been doing some research around the kind of corporate governance of the women's game, and there are some differences there.
Yeah.
So Beth, do you think sustainability, inclusion, a different fan experience, a different match day experience, can the women's game model some things that actually perhaps a segment of the men's game would like to follow?
I think the women's game offers a unique product, really. It's a much more perhaps family-friendly environment. If you ever go to a game and you look around, the fans are different sometimes to the fans you would see if you go to the equivalent men's game. And there's a whole host of reasons why that therefore offers an opportunity to clubs to widen their fan base, diversify their revenue stream, target merchandise and clothing to a different set of individuals. It's seen as much more inclusive and perceived to be a much more safer environment, perhaps for women, for children, for queer fans, who will watch women's football perhaps or engage with that, in contrast to some of the men's football fan cultures. So I think in the first part, it offers quite a unique product. And then in terms of sustainability, I think Christina mentioned it earlier on, in terms of revenues have grown quite significantly since the inception of the WSL. And I should caveat, we're talking about one league, and there is a much greater pyramid there underneath that. And there are challenges there with labour conditions and labour standards and work conditions. But it's got huge growth potential. I think the figure was 731% in terms of its growth in revenue. There you go, we got that one. And but it's got huge growth from there, and there are all sorts of reasons why. We've said about broadcasting, we've said about exposure. So it's sort of like a powder keg of all of these different aspects, which means it's a really exciting period of time. And you mentioned about governance, that actually it's a crucial time for governance as well, in terms of making sure that the right path is taken, or at least perhaps the wrong path is avoided.
Is there a
Also-
connection?
Oh, sorry,
yes.
sorry.
Yeah, go,
Sorry,
Christina.
no, I was just going to say, but also there are opportunities for the men's game to learn from that inclusivity, and I think there's also a tendency for some people to go, okay, let's just siphon off female fans towards the women's game, let's just siphon off families towards the women's game, and actually it's more kind of like, well, look at the experience, look at the kind of fans you are getting in there, people who are genuinely interested in football, who do not fit the stereotype fan for men's game. And why are they watching football? Because they like football, and maybe we should think about including them and bringing them into the men's game as well. So it's both ways. There's opportunities for women's football, but there's also opportunities for the men's game to learn from what's been happening in women's football.
And we can see, thinking about, one of the earlier workshops about Her Game Too, the activism, if you like, of women in the men's game, to say, actually, we want the match day experience to be different. And how many of us listening, I'm sure, have been to men's games where men, our male friends, colleagues have been saying, I don't really enjoy some of the things that are going on in the atmosphere around me, but sort of feel somehow that it's difficult to influence and kind of change that. I'm sorry, that's my phone ringing. Just put myself on mute for a minute. I can't stop that.
One of the things that kind of we looked at in the report, actually, from that side of things, is how I have completely lost my train of thought. See, this is what happens when things go on the
Don't worry. We were thinking about the sort of atmosphere at grounds, for men's matches too, and about how women are sort of trying to be catalysts for change.
Yeah, so one of the issues around female fans is, where do you report misogyny? Where do you report sexism? And that's kind of part of, where we kind of going with this, and some of the recommendations are sort of going forward. Think about, we want to be making spaces safe and inclusive, but in order to do that, you also need to call out bits that aren't being inclusive. And how do you do that? There need to be some mechanisms where women can report issues, where stewards are aware of how to deal with issues, and that's kind of part of the issues we are seeing within the findings of the report.
And I think that goes back to people being aware of the good work that is being done elsewhere. So, for instance, the club that I support, I went to the match last week, and there's a big banner in the concourse that says this is the number to text to report harassment or any sort of discrimination that you might feel, and that's from a whole host of different perspectives, and gender perhaps being one of those. So I think there's supporter groups now as well, so there are different elements there, but maybe it's about joining up the dots and connecting the dots, and also that clubs do promote those aspects and make fans aware of those different mechanisms or different aspects of how they can get involved and how they can help shape into a more inclusive culture. So there is really good stuff being done, and there's all sorts of initiatives by different governing bodies and different football associations. There's some really good stuff there going on to try and help change cultures within clubs or across the football landscape. It's not happening everywhere, and it's not happening at every league level. And what we don't want is gender diversity, equality, inclusion to be seen as something that's only achievable for clubs that have more money, that can invest time and money into this. And that's not what we want to be portraying.
Yeah, the financial argument is it's an investment, right? The same way that not all debt is bad. If you're getting debt, like a mortgage to build something because you don't have all the money up front, that's all right. I mean, depending on the financial sustainability, I could go on about this for ages, but it's an investment into something that you can then get a lot more out of. And I think that is the way it should be viewed, rather than an outright cost.
I was also struck by something that Kelly said this morning about, setting a bar in a way that is a kind of doing the right thing bar, that in a sense there's also an investment that you make in the kind of world that you want to live in. And I don't want to be, sound too sort of syrupy, because actually we're also saying that some of this investment in effect translates into good business. But I wonder, if some clubs actually know a route to kind of doing the right thing, whether is the first step the right women around the table in the boardroom that helps to kind of influence a different kind of culture and way of thinking. How do we pull some clubs into a space where actually this is part of their agenda?
I think understanding is the first step, and this is, one of the aims of the report is to actually showcase the links between diversity and finance, between diversity and good decision making. And I think there is a misconception. We've had multiple discussions at Fair Game with various clubs, and the fan-led review also has a whole section on ED&I, and we've had various comments around, well, that's not really relevant to this aspect. It's not really relevant to financial sustainability. What does it have to do with some of the principles of Fair Game? And actually, it's part of it. That's the whole idea. You can't just pick and choose which bits work. It's about looking at the whole system. And yes, getting more women in the boardroom to point out some of the issues does help, but it's not the only thing. It's considering, it's talking, it's understanding, and awareness, basic awareness of this is an issue for some people. Maybe we should address it because that will bring us benefits in the long term.
I'm not sure if anyone has any questions, so I'll perhaps ask a last thing and just keep a little eye on the chat. But, just you mentioned the fan-led review of football. What are your expectations of change as a result of that, and how might that change address some of the areas that you've identified in your report? Sorry, it's a bit of a meaty one, isn't it?
Well, I mean, obviously, from a Fair Game perspective, having a regulator in that looks at all these elements as a whole is a good place to start. So that would be the end game of the start, right? Have somebody who actually looks at, monitors, and makes people consider this, and then kind of more long term, because the problem you have with football is it is a short-term industry. People look very short-term, at least from the financial side, and hopefully that will help the sort of more long-term sustainable thinking. That's my hope anyway, but I'll pass you on to Beth, who might have a different angle.
Yeah, I think I think in the fan-led review it called for an EDI review of its own. And I think it's also important to say that, while we're talking about gender, but there are a whole host of other intersectional identities there that cause different experiences for different women within football. And so the need for a additional review that's more specifically targeted around that is needed because of the complexity of those different experiences. So I think that's a key point, and some of the research that we've done, and we've done with other collaborators that were on the report, that also calls for that as well. So I think it's about where do we go next, and this was a great starting point, and really pleased that within that review there was time and space given to some of these issues. But it's just a starting step, and we're hoping that that there's more there to be done.
Yeah, and on that point, this is obviously, the report is on gender diversity. We are celebrating International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. But a lot of the points in the report are about diversity in general. So that is worth thinking about, diversity and inclusion as a concept in general. And I think we are very lucky to be at a time where it is front and center. The government are considering it. We've had the fan-led review. There is potential for change, and let's all kind of get behind it and hopefully help it happen.
Great. Thank you so much. I think, seeing from the chat, it sounds as though the report is available on the website. So I'm going to call this to a close, and the next workshop, so we can try and save a tiny bit of time and try and get back on track, I think. There's one workshop, I think workshop 3, on becoming an ally. So that's a look at how men can support women in football and break the bias. And then workshop 4 is women in the boardroom. So you should be able to follow the links to those sessions. We're only about 5 minutes over time, and I guess they can probably still finish around 12:30. So leave this session and go into your workshop. And thank you very much, Christina and Beth, and anyone listening. See you in the next workshop.
Thanks, Radhika. Thank you.
Bye.